Record Store Nation, welcome. It is Rocktober. I can't believe a chill is in the air. The leaves are turning brown. I think that's a Mamas and the Papas lyric or something, but I digress because I live in digression. But I digress because it is I Want a Rocktober. So we decided to come up with a theme. Oh, and before we get into that, I also have to thank the Muffin Tops for our entrance music this time. The Muffin Tops, really interesting story. They started as a 50s doo-wop kind of group, and then they grew out of that. They became kind of, LSD-ish like the Beatles did and everything. So the Muffin Tops, very long, cool career for those guys, and I thank them for our entrance music today. So anyway, back to I Want a Rocktober. So it is Rocktober. We always come up with a different theme in Rocktober. The first couple years of the podcast, and that sounds really hard. That's weird for me to say the first couple years that I've been doing this for years now, which is so cool. And thank you guys so much for listening. But the first couple years, Rocktober was devoted to albums that came out that year. Because, the concept of the show is that I just happen to grab a random album, and it could be from any time. I mean, I have albums that date back to the 60s for sure. So it could be anywhere in the past 50 plus years of collecting CDs. So, but the concept and the theme that I had been doing for the last couple years in October was going to be new albums exclusively. So shout out to John McAdam. It was going to be stuff featuring bands that had released stuff that year. So it was a lot of fun, and actually discovered Mammoth, the Wolfgang Van Halen album, that way. And so this year, though, we tweaked it a little bit. Completely different subject, completely different topic. So it is going to be TRS, the Record Store Takes Over the Network, as usual in October, featuring episodes of the Record Store. And this year, the September episode got me thinking, because the September episode, if you recall, was Def Leppard. So the October episodes are all going to be devoted to hair bands and hair metal. And with the concept, Brian wanted me to analyze, do they hold up? Because basically hair bands and hair metal is from the 80s and 90s, and we want to see if they hold up. So that is the theme. So I have, in the hundreds and hundreds or thousands or whatever of CDs that I have, there's a handful of hair metal bands in there. The one band that I couldn't really get my hands around was Van Halen. Is Van Halen considered a hair band? I don't think so, but I was going to go with some Van Halen just to mix it up, but I managed to find 3 hair bands in the poll. And so we're starting out this week on episode 49 of The Record Store, first episode for October. It is going to be Motley Crue. So Motley Crue, definitely, I believe, one of the prototypical hair bands of the 80s and 90s. So the album specifically is Dr. Feelgood. Don't think I have too many Motley Crue albums. I think this might literally be the only one. But it was their 5th album. Doing the research, turns out Motley Crue only had 9 albums, half of which came out in the 80s. They've only done 2 albums since the year 2000. So only 2 albums in the 2000s. So roughly half their stuff came out in the 80s. So they formed in 81. Amazingly successful band. Sold over 100 million albums worldwide. 7 of the 9 albums went platinum. 22 top 40 hits. Hard to believe. I don't think I could name half of the 22 top 40 hits, but just the fact that they had them, pretty cool. It was mainly the same 4 guys throughout their career. Mainly Vince Neil, which I think his name was Vince Neil Wartalk or Warlock or something like that, Warheadic or something like that. I think it came out in his trial. But anyway, Vince Neil was the famous singer that is now more on the bloated side, that can't remember the words from all the videos that you see these days. Vince Neil, Nikki Sixx, Tommy Lee, and Mick Mars were the main 4 guys. Thinking maybe... Well, Nikki Sixx, obviously not a real name. Mick Mars, not a real name. By the way, shout out to Brian Trammell. For Mick Mars' real name is Bob Deal. So I just wanted to put that in there. Guessing Tommy Lee is probably his real name, but there's a last name just like with Vince Neil. So they both, interestingly, have middle names as their last names. But a few other guys filled in here and there. Mick Mars is now, of course, retired. I believe he's about 102 years old. He was, oddly enough, replaced by a former Marilyn Manson and Rob Zombie guitarist by the name of John 5. Just the number 5. not thinking I would go with 5 for my last name. But anyway, maybe I'd go with something else. So anyway, Motley Crue started out as a heavy metal band. Again, they formed in '81. They hit immediately. They did not pay their dues for very long. They were already on the scene within about the first 2 years of being a band. First two albums, definitely more of the metal influence for them, and then they veered towards glam metal or hair metal after that for most of the rest of their career. So interesting fact, there's the weird spelling of Crue, Crue, and then also the umlauts. There's an umlaut above the O in Motley and above the U in Crue. So it turns out the umlauts were lifted from Lowenbrau beer because they were all fans of Lowenbrau beer. So that is why the words are spelled the way they are, and the umlauts are there. So I thought that was kind of funny. So I think Motley Crue, for the most part, epitomizes the hedonistic, over-the-top, the excesses of the metal bands of the 80s and 90s, all the indulgences. I'm pretty sure they all married either porn stars or Playboy models to varying lengths of those marriages. So, but I know, obviously, Pam Anderson with Tommy Lee. I'm pretty sure they all married either, like I said, either porn stars or models. So, but to me, they really did epitomize that band, that genre rather, and that lifestyle, I guess, for that kind of band in the 80s and 90s. Those guys were the poster children of the excesses of the 80s and 90s metal bands. So interesting, when they first started out, some problems that immediately started for these guys. They got arrested en masse. All 4 of them got arrested in the Edmonton airport in Canada for wearing their spiked stage gear into customs to try to get on an airplane. So they all 4 were arrested for that. At the same arrest, Vince Neil was busted because he was carrying porn magazines in his bag. I'm like, I know it was 40 years ago, but are you really getting arrested for porn magazines in your bag? It might be embarrassing, I suppose, but I don't know that that's necessarily a crime, that you're crossing borders with porn. So, and then same year, there was a bomb threat. In fact, this is in Canada too. They were on their way to Canada. So, bomb threat was called into a club they were playing, and also at a hotel they were staying at. A TV was thrown off a balcony from a high-rise hotel. So it turns out all 4 of these incidents were all orchestrated by them and their management to try to get notoriety and to come across as being bad boys. So that is part of why, the arrest for the porn magazines in their bag. I'm like, no, that's really not I don't think that's you're not going to prison for that. So, but throwing the TV off the balcony, I suppose if it hit somebody, that would have been prison. So, anyway, but all of that, interestingly enough, all of those incidents were orchestrated by them to try to make their name even more notorious and out there. So, like I said, they hit big and they hit fast and hard. MTV definitely helped them out getting across. And they were big right away. Within the first couple albums, they were already huge worldwide. So in '84 was when Vince Neil was arrested because he was driving under the influence. And the drummer from a band called Hanoi Rocks, who went by the name of Razzle, guy's name was Nicholas Dingley, gets killed in the car that Vince Neil crashes. So Vince Neil served a whopping 18 days for this DUI. Charged with vehicular manslaughter and DUI, served 18 days, hard to fathom. And he was sued for $2.5 million by the Dingley family, and apparently they settled out of court. That was in '84. '86, Nikki Sixx nears overdose from heroin, and found near death in a dumpster in London. I'm like, okay, none of that surprises me. None of that is a shocker. But just the fact that he survived it, and that is obviously not something that was done like the other staged incidents that, to get notoriety and get their name out there. This is not staged. This dude's addicted to heroin. So he nearly overdoses. The following year in '87, he literally does overdose. Nikki Sixx does overdose. He's technically dead, but an EMT saves him with 2 shots of adrenaline. And it just, when I read that, it reminded me of the scene in Pulp Fiction with Uma Thurman and John Travolta, where the shot to the chest keeps somebody alive. So just amazing that this guy, like I said, he didn't learn his lesson in '86 when he's found near death in a dumpster, for Christ's sake. Keeps using at that point. In '88, their management forces them all to go into rehab because they're afraid that literally somebody's going to die on their watch, and they don't want that to happen. Nor do they want the band to fall apart because they're obviously this is their cash cow. So management all forces them all into rehab. And what's interesting is this album, Dr. Feelgood, came out in '89 after the '88 rehab stint for all of them. And the band's opinion is that Dr. Feelgood is their high point creativity because they were clean and sober, and they think that it's their best album. It is their top selling album too. And the critics, I'll get to what the critics thought, but interesting there too. But the band members thought this was their best album because of the sobriety. So again, Motley Crue tapered off. They were one of the biggest, if not, well, they were definitely one of the biggest metal bands for sure in their era. And they were one of the biggest bands in the world at that time. But they tapered off for similar reasons we talked about with Def Leppard. The grunge really picked up with Nirvana, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, that Pearl Jam, that really took off. And alternative really took off, So, I mean, I think it was the combination of those musical styles taking off that hurt Motley Crue, as well as, let's face it, their own excesses, because there were many arrests, there were many lawsuits, there was many walking out on the band episodes, and then coming back to the band. There was their own excesses that basically pushed them down. Vince Neil quit or was fired. It was one of those, I quit, you're fired type deals. And then they kind of just sputtered from there. Didn't do a whole lot more albums after that, but they did do a handful. They did, I think it was one album with some other dude singing, and that went nowhere. It got panned. They did their final show on quote-unquote final show. It's shout out to Terry Funk because they've retired so many times, the late Terry Funk. So their final show was recorded on New Year's Eve of 2015, going into 2016, and it was called The End. But not so much. They had actually, the four of them, it was still, at that point, with all the revolving doors of membership and retirements and quitting and you're fired and all that, it was those four guys that were comprising Motley Crue at that point. They had actually signed a document that was going to be the last show. They signed a legal document that was going to be the end. And they titled the show The End. They released it all over the place. And that was supposed to be it. But lo and behold, they returned in 2019 and they cited a loophole in the document that they were able to come back and do more touring and do more recording. So they did record a little bit more after that. No proper albums per se, but I guess they're still working on some stuff. They released a couple songs. They toured, ironically, with Def Leppard, and they say, as of right now, they're saying that they're still touring and they're still going to be doing more stuff. So again, talking about the critics on this one, the critics love Dr. Feelgood. It was their only album that hit number one on the charts, and it is their best-selling album to this day. Did very well worldwide. Again, just like with Def Leppard, it did really well in Scandinavia. So something about Sweden, Norway, and Finland, they just love their hair metal and their metal that is either coming from England or the States. So did really well there. This album had a couple of guests. Steven Tyler was on a song. Robin Zander and Rick Nielsen, which surprised me because those are two of my favorite guys from Cheap Trick. They're on a song. Bryan Adams is on here, and also Jack Blades, not a household name, but the singer that was with Night Ranger appears on a couple songs too. So I find it amusing that when I open this album, it includes the lyrics. I always talk about make it easy for me. I want to follow the lyrics. I really want to analyze the songs, and I want to see what they're singing about. So you talk about, these great lyricists, Bono and The Edge and Bob Dylan and Chrissie Hynde and all these great writers and great lyricists, Stevie Nicks, and then you've got Motley Crue, and they're giving you the lyrics. It's like they're saying, hey, look at us. We're idiots, and we can't write a song to save our lives in terms of depth and, something really intellectual. But we're going to give you the goddamn lyrics. So they put it right in there. There's a handful of pictures of them in various, straight jackets, like they're coming from a mental institution or something. But there's various pictures of them like that, as well as the lyrics. So I'll give them credit. They maybe they're vapid, but they're gonna give us those lyrics. Damn it! So anyway, so this album had 11 songs, 5 of which were released as singles. So again, just a really huge hit album for them. Uh, Running airtime on this album is 45 minutes, which is hard to believe that their songs are long enough that they could go 45 minutes. So anyway, all right, starting out. First song is called TNT, in parentheses, Terror in Tinseltown. So I'm thinking it's going to be an actual song. It was not a song. It was actually 42 seconds of basically like kind of 911 call sound effects. I'm thinking it's something to do with the Nikki Sixx overdose. And that's how they're getting the album started, is like the sound of cars and crashes and stuff, and then just the sound of the operator on the 911 call. Obviously staged, but still. So that's pretty much how it starts out. Leads right into the second song, which is the title track, Dr. Feelgood. Just that typical driving metal guitar open. The familiar riff for this song comes in real soon. And, you know, I hadn't really thought about this song very much. Obviously, it was a big single for them, so it's on my mind. It's been over 30 years since this came out, and I'm not thinking about it. But in doing the research, you know, in them saying that the rehab helped them and the rehab cleared their heads and they wrote better music for this. So my thought is that Dr. Feelgood was the guy that cleaned them up. You know, as I'm reading that, and then now Dr. Feelgood comes on, I'm thinking, oh, this is the guy that straightened them out and got them to a happy place where they could actually write good music. No, not so much. If you're reading along with the lyrics, it's about drug dealers, basically. So Dr. Feelgood is their drug dealer. So immediately, you know, the Vince Neil voice. It's really weird to me because there's people, I love Geddy Lee. Geddy Lee, the lead singer of Rush, in my Mount Rushmore of greatest vocalists of all time, favorite vocalists of all time. I love Geddy Lee. But what I know is that Geddy Lee is very polarizing. People either love Geddy Lee or hate Geddy Lee. Why is Vince Neil not polarizing? This guy has a terrible voice. This guy is so whiny. It works. He's so shrill. It works in this setting with this music. It works, but man, what an annoying voice Vince Neil has when you really think about it. You know, compared to all these great, you know, my other Mount Rushmores, Roger Daltrey for sure, Robin Zander, but I'm just Ann Wilson. That's my complete Mount Rushmore for you. But I'm like, these are great, great vocalists, and how can you even put Vince Neil in the same category? You know, he's just such a bad voice. But anyway, but you know what? In these songs, it works. Dr. Feelgood, a catchy song, definitely defines them. I just think it's weird, excuse me, but it's weird that the subject matter is their drug dealer and that this song actually not only gets airplay, but becomes a hit single. So anyway, Dr. Feelgood, kind of pretty much the opener after TNT. Third song is called Slice of Your Pie. Anyway, I'm thinking, could it be about sex? Geez, I'm not sure. So, and I'm surprised that, you know, with half the album getting released as a single, how is Slice of Your Pie not released as a single? So it surprisingly starts with a soft acoustic open. I'm thinking, did they get hacked? What happened here? Where's Motley Crue? Where's Vince Neil with that shrill ass voice? So, but then the band comes in, it gets harder at that point. He sings that she's so young, if he ever gets caught, he'll be arrested. I'm like, oh, it's just so obvious, you know, just everything about these guys is just so obvious. So, and then at one point he refers to her as being 19. So, not going to comment there, not saying anything, but I don't know what law, maybe they were down south or whatever. But anyhow, typical Slice of Your Pie, typical double entendres, you know, they talk about pie, sticky sweet, the rear view. I'm like, it's just so obvious with Motley Crue. So this song has kind of a bluesy sound to it, mixed in with their typical sound. The other interesting thing about this song is that they literally lift the end of the Beatles' She's So Heavy fade out. They lift that, the really hard driving bass and drums. They literally lift it and they play it to be the fade out for Slice of Your Pie. So I'm like, did they get sued for this? Because honestly, they just literally picked up that music and played like the last 45 seconds to a minute of She's So Heavy is the end of this song too. So very strange. Not sure how they got away with it, but it was kind of cool hearing Motley Crue play the Beatles, but still very strange. So all right, that is side one of Dr. Feelgood by Motley Crue. We'll be right back after a few words from our sponsors with side two. Stay with us on the Record Store, guys.